Hi, my name's James. I'm a tutor for homeschool tutoring. I'm also a English teacher, teaching at a high school on the Wirral. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the AQA English Language Paper 1, Section A and Section B, as a resource for revision for the upcoming summer exam series. So without further ado, we'll get started. So, just before we move on, as you can see, we're looking at the June 2023 paper. The time for paper one is the same as paper two. It's 1 hour and 45 minutes. So I'm sure your teachers have told you before, you really need to bear the time in mind for when you are working through your exam paper, as well as talking through the question papers. I will also remind you of the recommended times to spend on each question so that you can get a feel for the sort of the time and speed that you're going to be working through. And obviously, with the breakdown of the assessment objectives, I will give you a time reference for each question. So the exam paper is worth 80 marks. It's 40 marks for section A and there's 40 marks for section B. So it's evenly balanced. And that's the same for paper two also. So let's move on to question one. So with the exam paper, as I'm sure many of you will know, you will have the question paper, you will also have the insert as well. For paper one, there is only one text, whereas paper two, there is two texts, but I won't focus much on that, obviously, because we're doing question paper one. My apologies. I will focus on the text that we are focusing on today. So question one is worth 4 marks. So I would advise about 5 minutes maximum on this question. It says, read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 6. List 4 things about the hyena from this part of the source. So it's really important that you read the question again. You will only get marks for gathering sourcing information from between lines 1 to 6. Do not source information from any other lines, any other part of the text, because you will get no marks. Okay. So it's really, really important that you pay attention to the question and you double check where the examiner is asking you to retrieve questions from or information from. So it's basically a retrieval of explicit and implicit information. And as a reminder of that, explicit is what is obvious, is what is on the page. Implicit is what we are having to deduce, what we are having to take away and infer from the meaning of the text. So to accompany this walkthrough, I have taken from AQA's website the marked questions to make things a little bit easier, but also to give you a more honest and broader overview of the sort of top level question responses. I have used AQA's marked insert. So I'm just going to show you for this question what kinds of responses the examiners would be looking for. So just to give you a quick breakdown, responses must be drawn only from lines 1 to 6, as I've said, and responses must relate to what we learned about the hyena, not Pi, not the narrator. So again, it's really important that you bear in mind the focus of the question there. It's about the hyenas, it's about nothing else. So we're really focused on the lines where we're taking the information from and the focus of the question, which is the hyenas. So as you will see here, indicative content. Students may include any or all of those bullet points. Obviously, you only have spaces for four responses. So any of those, as you can see there, for example, hyenas cause worry, hyenas worry pie, hyenas attack zebras, hyenas attack noose, and so on. So those are the kinds of explicit, obvious bits of information that you can take from lines 1 to 6. Don't spend more than 5 minutes on this question, obviously, because the marks are relatively low in comparison to the other questions. I would say this is perhaps more of a warm-up question just to sort of get you into the feel, the mood, the atmosphere of the text itself. So again, just to recap, it's trying to find explicit and implicit information, but I would maybe focus more on what's obvious, what's on the page there. We're focusing solely on the hyenas. So if we move over to question 2. So question 2 asks us to look in detail at this extract from lines 10 to 19. So for this question, all you are doing is you're solely focusing on the text which appears in the box on the question paper there. You can look at the source if you want to, but the text is there for you there. So why would you need to do that? And maybe we just focus on the question paper. So question 2 is all about language. It's all about analyzing language. It's all about considering the effects of the writer's choices of words. What impressions does it give us? What are we meant to think? What are we meant to feel? What questions does it raise for us? We're solely focusing on language for question 2. So the main 3 things that I would focus on is how. Language, the focus, again, it's the hyena's appearance. So if we're thinking about language, we're thinking about things like verbs, adjectives, nouns, pronouns, maybe more advanced language techniques. We're thinking of things like metaphor, simile, personification. Is there any onomatopoeia? And so on. I would revise, as I'm sure you will do, you should revise your language techniques, become more familiar with them. And we're thinking about why, out of all the vocabulary that the writer could have chosen when they were creating this piece of writing, why have they chose those descriptions? What are they trying to convey to the reader? What impressions are they trying to create in our minds? What paintings are they trying to create, portray in our minds? What impressions are they trying to make and why? So that is what we're focusing on. So the how part of this question is, well, what are the words and what are their effects? What is the reader thinking, feeling? What questions do they have? And it's solely on the hyena's appearance. So just as a rebuttal for my explanation there, you've got 3 bullet points here, which says words and phrases, language features and techniques, and also sentence forms. So it says you could include the writer's choice of, but in essence, what that means is you should. So we're thinking of words and phrases, language features and techniques, as I've mentioned. Also sentence forms, maybe we can think about, are there short sentences? Are there long sentences? We'll focus on that. Question 2, my apologies, is worth 8 marks. So you're looking to spend maximum about 10 minutes on this question, minimum of 2 paragraphs, but I would say safely to focus on perhaps 3 paragraphs, just to sort of give us that buffer, that cushion of confidence that we know we've addressed the question. And again, what I will do is I will refer back to the marked examples for this. So what I want to do here is I just want to focus on level 4, perhaps look at level 3 as well, and what we're thinking about. If we just focus on that top box there, is the assessment objective, which shows perspective and detailed understanding of the language. So you're analysing the effects of the writer's choice of language. You're also selecting a range of judicious textual detail. And what that means is you're being the judge. You're deciding, well, what descriptions are there which show the reader the hyena's appearance. And we're also making sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So what that means is you're able to demonstrate in quite a lot of detail, sophistication, that you can identify language terminology, language techniques, language methods, and you can articulate and you can explain, well, what are the effects of those on the reader? The reader, remember, always, it's you initially, but you can also contemplate and you can consider, how would this piece of writing entertain? How would it interest a reader in general? Could be anyone. So we're just thinking about, why has the writer created this? Remember, it's a piece of fiction. It's there for entertainment. How does this piece of writing entertain us as readers? That's what we're thinking about. It's thinking about the writer's purpose in the first place. So for a top level mark, for 7 to 8 marks, I'm just going to read the top response here. It says, the writer's description of the hyena criticizes its unpleasant appearance and introduces the idea of it being a malicious threat. The adjective ugly labels the hyena as grotesque straight away, and this is further emphasized by the harshness of the dismissive short sentence. The writer has always also chosen the phrase beyond redemption because redemption has connotations of being saved from evil, as if the hyena's ugliness is symbolic of a deeper, sinister nature that cannot be reversed. So, what we've got there, the response from this student, they've made a very clear point. They've used point evidence explain. If you use a slightly other method at your place of learning, peel, P paragraphs, or something of that nature. I'm just going to talk solely about P paragraphs. So they've made a very clear point there. They've used quite in-depth vocabulary. It has an unpleasant appearance. It introduces the idea of having a malicious threat, something that's very dangerous, a hyena that's very dangerous and threatening to humans. The students also used their subject terminology, so the adjective ugly, they've zoomed in on a particular word and they've exploded that quote there. It labels the hyenas as grotesque straight away, and this further emphasized by the harshness of the dismissive short sentence. So it's nicely linked to the next identification of methods. And finally there, the student has zoomed in again. So it's all about finding a quote, but it's also about zooming in. We're going forensic in language analysis. We're really zooming in with the metaphorical microscope as if to say we are trying to go really deep and in depth in trying to break apart what is behind these words. So the connotations of being saved from evil, as if the hyena's ugliness is symbolic of a deeper, sinister nature that cannot be reversed. So there's very interesting there, the word redemption. It has almost like religious connotations. Is it evil? So you're really looking to go in depth with a word or two words. That's what the examiners want to see. You can do less. You can do more with less. A couple of words or a word, the examiners really want to see how in depth you can zoom in and you can break those words apart and you can really provide some interesting details about what they've tried to achieve. Okay, let us move on to question 3. Scroll down. So question 3 is the structure question. And I think students sometimes can get tripped up because they confuse structure with language, or they may suspect that they have to identify language as well as structure. We're only focusing on structure. So structural techniques are things like focus, shift, beginnings, middle, and end, zooming in, zooming out, withholding information, foreshadowing, and so on. There's some great resources out on the internet, as I'm sure you will have made full use of from your teachers also. BBC Bite Size is also great if you want to type in structural techniques revision. There is a wealth of resources out there. My initial stopping point would be BBC, just to refresh your memories. Obviously, because you've got lots going on in preparation for exams, you've got a whole host of subjects to be revising for. So just refresh your memories with structural techniques. But today, what I'm going to do is I would just like to focus on just a couple, which I will talk you through, but then I will also show you the marked response as well. So for question 3, read the question again. I can't emphasize enough how reading the question, making sure you are understanding of what the examiners are asking you to do. So you need to think about the whole of the source. You're reading the whole of the source. And I will just flick over to this now. So for source A there, we have 50 lines, as you can see, and you need to read the whole of this. Initially, for question 3, what I would say is I would break the source down into a beginning, a middle, and end. And what I do usually with my students is, if you can see there where I've highlighted the numbers, perhaps I would mark that as the beginning. And then perhaps from 15 to 30, I would mark that as the middle. And from 35 until 45, I would mark that as the end. And I will explain a little bit more about why I do that in a minute. So I'm breaking down the source into 3 parts, and I'm taking a step back. We're not being forensic about our English language analysis like we were in question 2. We're stepping back and we're zooming out of the question, and we're thinking about it as parts, thinking about it as building blocks. Why is the writer structured their piece of writing, or this piece of writing? Why have they done it to interest us? How have they achieved a change in mood, a change in focus? Have they built any tension? Is the story the same at the start, or is it the end? So that's what we're really focusing on. We're not necessarily focusing on the language in depth as we were in question two. So, for our sake, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? So, broadly speaking, when an author is sat at their table, at their desk, wherever they may be, and they're writing a piece of fiction, you can more or less guarantee it's they want to achieve some kind of level of serious engagement for their reader. They want to hook the readers. They really want to interest them. They really want to get the reader immersed in the story. So the objective of all great pieces of literature, they're trying to hook us. They're trying to keep the reader entertained all the way through. It's what's called a page turner. You want to be finding out what's going on next. Same with any great film or any great piece of theatre. You're always looking for what's going to happen next. You really want to find out. And that's the achievement of all great authors, all great filmmakers, and so on. And that's what we're thinking about. How has the writer structured the text to interest us as readers? So you could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So that links in again to my point of breaking apart the text, the source, into three parts: beginning, middle, and end. What do we focus on at the start? Then how does the writer shift our attention all the way through? Do they build tension? Do they build suspense? Is the source trying to drive us in any way to carry on reading? What do we want to find out? And of course, you can focus on some more. To keep things simple, I would suggest you don't have to do this, but I would focus on breaking the text into three parts, focusing on focus shifts. What do we focus on at the start? Are there shifts between paragraphs? So you're identifying shifts through paragraphs. What did we focus on before? What is the writer focusing our attention on next? With short or long sentences, short sentences are fantastic methods for building tension. Okay, so I would read up a little bit more about how the length of sentences affects the tension and the suspense of a story. So really would be a good idea to focus on that aspect of structural features. Okay. Also think about, is the writer giving us all the information in one go? Are they making us question anything at the start? Are they withholding any information? Do they foreshadow anything? What are we expecting to uncover at the end of a text? So again, think about those kinds of things. We're not thinking about the forensics of language methods. Question three, again, it's 8 marks, so I would probably spend maximum 10 minutes on this question. Obviously, we can't beat the clock in the exam, so the key things are you're keeping an eye on the time, you're writing fast as well. So it is a technique that does take some cultivation, some practice, but as I'm sure you will all be very motivated students, you can achieve success in this way. So what I'll do here is I will just revert to my mark scheme. These are answers that have been pulled together by the examiners at AQA. These reflect the best of what has been written in response to the arguments. And again, you can find these on AQA's website, but for today, I will just focus on, you can see level 3 there, but I also want to always focus on level 4, the top level. We always want to aim for the top, don't we? Want to be ambitious with our exam responses. So, skills description. They analyse the effects of the writer's choices of structural features and selects a range of judicious examples. So again, it's you're being very selective about what you pick and make sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So you want to demonstrate, you want to show off your structural methods terminology to the examiner. You want to project confidence. You want to show that you know what you're on about. So the indicative standard here, which is highlighted in purple. Firstly, the writer focuses on Pi being worried, stemming from the recollection of his father's words about the threat posed by hyenas, establishing an anxious tone. So again, there it's focusing on tone. What's the mood and atmosphere like at the very start? Because Pi has been previously warned and mentally prepared, the unpredictable danger from the hyena is presented as a valid threat earlier in the passage. The narrator presents the unequal power dynamic between himself and the animal, and therefore signals the subconscious sense of imminent danger and potential harm, which is developed through the passage. So again, it's focusing on how does the tension, how does this suspense, how does it build throughout the source? Okay, so you're thinking about that. You're taking a step back from the source, and you're thinking about how does this feeling, how does this mood and tension start to build up? What are we building up to? This is what we want to do. This is the whole idea of page turn. We want to find out what's happening next. The narrator presents the unequal power dynamic between himself and the animal and therefore signals the subconscious sense of imminent danger, potential harm, which is developed through the passage. However, by the end, this fear is shown to have been unfounded as the threat diminishes and the hyena did not move for the rest of the day. So what that student has done is they have taken an overview, they've stepped back and they've had a look. What is it like at the start? How does it change during the middle? What are we building up to? We're building up. I suspect the reader may be expecting that the hyena is going to attack Pi, but ultimately those fears are unfounded. It's the expectation is building us up, but the reality is the hyena is rather sick on the boat. For those of you who've ever read the story, you may know this. So it's almost like what we would say it's a bit of a plot twist. So it's really thinking about that passage. How do we begin at the start? What's it like at the end? And does the start of the story match up with the end of the story? So thinking about those beginning, middle, and end. And as you can see, there is a response for level 3. But just for the sake of this tutorial, I always want to focus on the top level marks, level 4. Okay. So let's move on to question 4. So just have a quick read of this. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from lines 20 to the end. So all you are doing is you're solely focusing on that part of the text. So a statement here. A student said, this part of the story where the hyena behaves wildly is funny rather than frightening. The writer suggests that the hyena is actually no serious threat to Pi. So as we've worked our way through the source, we've got some general ideas of what's going on in this source, don't we? We've had a look at question 3. We've read the whole source, haven't we? So we know what's going on. To what extent do you agree? A student hasn't said this. This is a hypothetical. This is a scenario that the examiners are presenting to us. And it's our job to decide, well, do we agree? Do we disagree? Or do we have more of a balanced view? I say sometimes, well, I advise students agree with the statement because we kind of know that from reading the whole source in text in question 3 that we know that it is, there are elements of the hyena behaving wildly. It's funny rather than frightening towards the end. The writer, I suppose, they do suggest that the hyena is actually no serious threat to Pi, but initially we don't know that, do we? So the writer has created that air of suspense, that mood and atmosphere of tension. So just for the sake of this tutorial, I think we should think that we agree. Okay. And in response, you could consider your impressions of how the hyena behaves, evaluate how the writer presents the threat of the hyena to Pi, and support your response with references to the text. 20 marks. I would advise that maximum 25 minutes is spent on this question. Okay. With the methods here, where it says you can evaluate the writer's methods, which, sorry, my apologies, it doesn't say that, but what we can do in question 4, you can identify both language and structure for question 4. So you can bring responses, you can bring quotations for both language and structure for this question. Okay. My advice would be the bare minimum for question 4 would be 4 paragraphs. But ideally, if I was marking this question, I would probably perhaps like to see 5 paragraphs in response. But again, obviously, time is of the essence. Don't overstretch yourself. Work within the time constraints of the questions. If you manage to get 4 paragraphs done for this question, wonderful. If you stretch to 5, fantastic. But again, we're blending response with language techniques, structural techniques, and we're thinking about how is the writer use those to create the part of the story where the hyena behaves wildly, is funny rather than frightening, and ultimately suggests that the hyena is actually no serious threat to Pi. So let us have a look at where we were focusing on. So lines 20 to the end, or you would be doing the exam, you would be focusing on this paragraph here, and you would be focusing there. So it's roughly half of the extracts there, if you can see that. So that's all we would be focusing on for this question. Again, can't emphasize enough, make sure you are clear of where you are taking information from, because if you take it from anywhere other than lines 20 to the end, you won't be receiving the marks. So please just bear that in mind. Again, what I will do is I will refer to question 4 on the mark scheme here, just to again demonstrate the best of what has been written that AQA have pulled together. So it's assessment objective 4, evaluate text critically and support this with appropriate textual references. So you're making an evaluation, you're deciding, well, is the student right? Do you agree? But for the sake of the tutorial, we are going to agree. So at the top level there, the skills descriptors shows perspective and detailed evaluation. So develops a convincing and critical response to the focus of the statement. Shows perceptive understanding of the writer's methods. Selects a range of judicious textual detail and also evaluates critically and in detail the effects on the reader. So again, to emphasize, when we are analyzing either structure or language, we really want to sort of break it apart. What we really don't want to do is echo the quotes. We really want to break them apart forensically. We really want to sort of reflect on our own impressions. What pictures do the use of structure, the use of language, what impressions do they give us as readers? How do we think, feel? What is going on in that cinema of our minds, so to speak? What paintings are the words creating in our minds? What can we see? What can we visualize? Why is this? How has the writer tried to entertain us as readers? That is purely what it's about. It's about the purpose of the writing. So the indicative standard here, I will just focus on this top level one for our tutorial. It would be easy to initially see the hyena's wild behavior as frightening, but when you look at how it is described, then it is definitely more amusing. The way that it ran in circles would be intimidating if it was circling its prey, but in fact, it is just making itself increasingly sick and confused, despite Pi remaining frozen with fear. So again, it's the focus, isn't it? It's the focus of the question. This part of the story where the hyena behaves wildly is funny rather than frightening. So that is the main point that the student has made there. And what this student has done really well is they've really stuck to that first part of the statement, really, really focusing on, well, is it behaving wildly? Why is it funny rather than frightening? So that is the anchor of this question. You're always reverting back to the question. When we're reading through, it's easy sometimes to maybe right off on a tangent, maybe go on something and lose focus, which we all do, which is, it's no problem. But in the exam, that's the thing that we don't want to happen, because we've only got an hour and 45 minutes. That's our window to impress the examiners. So really check back on your question and making sure that you are stuck to the focus, the essence of what the question is asking us to do. If we just focus back here on the purple, the methods, the writer uses the repeated circular motion as a symbol for the hyena's pointless behavior, as if it does not have a clue what it is doing. This is made even more ridiculous by the repetition of the onomatopoeic yip noise that the animal makes. So again, the student has identified their methods and really focused on one word, one three-letter word reference in the text there. You can always do more with less, and it's more about your writing than it is including big quotes. I've seen students who've written almost paragraph size quotations expecting that to get them to pass. It will not do. Less is more in this case. Choose a word, 2 words. It's all about your analysis. What impressions is it giving you? Linking it back to the question. How is the hyena? How does it come across as funny rather than frightening? Again, it's the writer's craft. How have they purposed their words, their methods to entertain you? How have they created that image of the hyena being funny rather than frightening? Whilst this is going on, all mourning would certainly be annoying. It is hardly the noise of a ferocious predator, and more you say the sound, the more trivial it actually becomes. And the final evaluation here, the repetitive nature of both movement and the sound emphasizes to the reader the bizarre performance that Pi is forced to endure until a sudden anticlimax removes any remaining sense of threat altogether. So the student there is focused on repetition and anticlimax. They've focused on structural techniques there, and they've reflected on, I suppose, the build-up of the writer's words and phrases leading up to this point. I wonder if the reader is expecting that the hyena is going to pounce on Pi. In actual fact, it is quite the opposite. It's the hyena is a bit of a ridiculous creature almost, isn't it? So they've focused perhaps more on language, but certainly they finished with structural analysis at the very end there. So again, question 4 is about, to what extent do you agree? My advice would be to save you time in the exam. Time is a luxury that we don't have. In abundant time is certainly not in abundance in the exam anyway. Focus on language, focus on structure, always be checking back to the question, always be checking back that you're focusing on the essence of the first point there. This part of the story where the hyena behaves wildly is funny rather than frightening. But what evidence is there to suggest that that's what you are trying to do in this exam question? Okay. So that is section A. That is 40 marks in section A completed. And what I will do now is I will just focus on section B. Unfortunately for this particular exam paper, the awarding body have not been able to reproduce the picture, but for the sake of this tutorial, I have managed to find it here. So we'll just focus on the mark scheme document that I have in front of me here. So, question 5. Wildlife magazine is running a creative writing competition, and the winning entry will be published in its next edition. Either write a description of a zoo or wildlife park as suggested by this picture, or write a story about a human meeting an animal. So you have two choices. You have a choice of description rather than narrative, vice versa. Whatever you feel comfortable with, you can choose to do. The question is 40 marks. I would spend 5 minutes planning, 40 minutes writing. So there you have 45 minutes to complete this question. So this is half of your exam marks. 24 marks are awarded for content and organisation. 60 marks are awarded for technical accuracy. I will just focus on the marks breakdown there before I carry on any further. Let me just find where I need to be. So I'll just focus quickly on AO6. So 60 marks. Sentence demarcation, again, we're focusing on level 4, is consistently secure and consistently accurate. So again, that's writing using full stops, capital letters at the very minimum, and there's a wide range of punctuation used with a high level of accuracy. So what we're trying to achieve in question 5 is you're demonstrating that you can write like an adult, you can write at an adult level. You're almost imagining you're trying to write to get a book published. It's going to be in the shelves, maybe perhaps Waterstones, W.H. Smith, or your local bookshop. We're aiming for that highest level. That is what I've seen marking papers in the past. That is what I have seen students close to achieving, a level of writing that is sophisticated, that is at a level where, you could be looking to publish it. So the best students who have achieved grade 9 have come close to that level of formality in their writing. I'll just go back to AO6 here. Use a range of appropriate sentence forms for effect. So you're using long, short sentences. You're using simple, compound, and complex sentences. So you're showing the examiner that you can use a variety of sentence forms. You're using standard English consistently and appropriately with secure control of complex grammatical structures. So you can use grammar confidently. You're using standard English. You're using no slang. You're using no perhaps social media jargon, things you may have seen on TikTok, Instagram. Forget all that, like tech speak, forget that. We need to be writing full sentences. We need to be writing full words. We don't want any abbreviated or any shortened words of any kind. It needs to be standard English to maximize our potential for marks. High level accuracy in spelling, including ambitious vocabulary. Spelling is a thing that we all need to work on individually. There's no universal remedy for the shortcomings in any of our spellings. It's just a case if you don't know a word, now's the time to be practicing your spellings and sharpen those up. And everyone is individual in their concerns for their spelling abilities. But what the examiners do want to see is something that we perhaps have more consistent control over is ambitious vocabulary. So it's using what better words can we use? What is the best vocabulary that we come out with in the exam? So it's all about impressing the examiner with the level of vocabulary that we can use. You know, it's trying to achieve adult vocabulary and sophistication. Okay. Extensive and ambitious use of vocabulary. So again, there it's consistent all the way out. Maybe perhaps you don't have one or two words for the top level students who are achieving between 13 to 16 marks. They're consistently using polysyllabic words. They're using the big words that are going to impress the examiners. So it's all about from now until the exam. My advice would be learn a new word every day. Learn something that's sophisticated. Perhaps learn 10 new words in 2 weeks' time. Practice writing those, practice incorporating those, and that is how you build up your vocabulary. There's no perhaps surefire method of doing this. Language acquisition is all about absorbing vocabulary from any source, from your friends, from your parents, from newspapers, from the TV, from film, from any source possible. If you like the word, you think it's interesting, take it, it's yours. That is how we acquire language. And very quickly, I will also focus on AO5. So content and organization. Communicate clearly, effectively, and imaginatively. You can read that there whilst I'm having a look at the skills descriptors. So for level 4, for top level, it's going to be compelling, convincing communication. Tone, style, and register are assuredly matched to the purpose and audience. So tone, style, and register. Imagine if you're picking up a famous piece of work, perhaps something William Shakespeare or George Orwell or Charles Dickens. We're talking about tone, style, and register. It's talking about those authors and how have they thought about the level of sophistication of their writing. I want to pick up for my top level students when I'm marking, I want to pick up an exam paper for question 5, and I want to feel as if I'm reading a story that I've just picked up in a book in W.H. Smith or Waterstones or wherever. There are other bookshops available. It's all about trying to aim for that top level. It's almost as if you've picked up a book and it's like, wow, this is an incredible piece of description or narrative. Again, extensive vocabulary. It's all about choosing the top level, the top variety of vocabulary that we can use to impress. Varied and inventive use of structural features. So can you take any examples of structure that you've read in the source? Again, it's all about acquiring the language. Be inspired by the source that you've just read. Could you lay out the source beginning, middle, and end? Could you build up that tension in which Pie and the Hyena extract has done? It's all about being inspired, and it's taking inspiration from that source. So maximize your time in the exam and think about, well, how could I structure my writing in a similar way? So it's all there for inspiration. Okay, so take that. Writing is compelling, incorporating a range of convincing and complex ideas. Suppose the easiest way to explain this is using quite sophisticated language techniques, using lots of metaphors, lots of similes, entertain the reader, make the reader feel interested. Address the reader if you knew they were an intellectual person who enjoys reading. How can you satisfy their intellectual curiosity in their writing? In their reading, your writing, my apologies, and fluently link paragraphs with seamlessly integrated discourse markers. So again, new topic, new sentence, and so on. I would revise paragraphs if you're unsure. It's about structuring your writing paragraphs. I see so many students who have written great writing, but they have lost out because they haven't paragraphed their work. If we're moving on to a new topic, a new sentence, a new time, new place, it's always about new paragraph, but also introducing a new discourse marker, something like a timestamp, something like later on that day, and so on. Okay. So I'll just go back here to our question. So you have an image And what I always say to my students is my key stage four, my year 10s and my year 11s is imagine you are inside that picture there. I mean, I know it's a cartoon, but there's loads of detail. It's almost like a Where's Wally picture, isn't it? It's quite fascinating. There's such a rich level of detail. What I would say is if we're going to write a description, I want to imagine we're there. We're one of these people inside this picture and we're roaming around this zoo here. So we've got bears, elephants, we've got a whole array of birds. We've got tigers of some description. We've got lions, giraffes. There's a wealth of detail that we could write about. And we've got the cityscape here and we've got the skyline as well. I would, in my planning is really important for this question, spend 5 minutes, circle five things, and then we're all imagining that we are inside this picture, a description of a zoo or wildlife park. We can imagine we're walking around this zoo. Perhaps anyone has been to a zoo or a safari park, or perhaps has even been on safari or has experienced nature of some kind. We're bringing our cultural capital. We're bringing our experiences from what we know. Well, what do we know and how can we bring this to life? I would say, we imagine we're here and we're describing the appearance, the sound, the smell. We want to describe as if we're in this picture and we are literally feeling and experiencing with all of our senses, touch, taste, smell, see, hear. We're experiencing these animals. My other piece of advice would be show, don't tell. I'm sure you've all heard that before. We want to show the reader what it's like. We want to show the reader what this zoo, what this animal enclosure is like. We want to give as much detail as possible. Impress the reader with your level of vocabulary. Again, always be linking it back to assessment objectives, AO5 and AO6. So it's about giving as rich a detail as possible. Make the reader feel as if they're there in the zoo with you and they're walking around. Okay. And lastly, I will focus on write a story about a human meeting an animal. So my main piece of advice would be, if we're focusing on this bit here, what I would like to do is just maybe focus on what the examiners have said. So it's appeared to be the less favoured of the two options. I think perhaps students struggle with piecing a narrative together. I think what you would need to do ideally is have a beginning, a middle, and an end and focus on just one part, one initial meeting of a creature. And if we're focusing on the strongest responses here, what can we see? The more successful students have decided upon a situation and animal, but have also chosen a theme that they wanted to explore. There were themes of rescue, extinction, a bond between human and animal, comfort therapy, and or discovering a new species. So if we're thinking about a story, maybe perhaps the thing that we can take away today is it's about theme of extinction or rescue, and it's one moment meeting the animal. All I would suggest for this question is, if we're going back to it, writing a story, again, go back to BBC Bite Size, brush up on story techniques. It's all about beginning, middle, and end. Maybe you would also like to focus on Freytag's pyramid as well, how we structure stories. But again, it's incorporating that level of detail and sophistication. It's all about description for this question. Okay, I hope that has been helpful for you. Like I say, there are always a range of resources that you can find online to help you, but I hope that this tutorial has been helpful today. Thank you very much.